Hello, everyone. Hi, I am Kayla Underkoffler, lead security engineer in the CTO office at Zenity. We are going to get started in just a minute here, give folks some time to join us, and then we'll kick off. We'll have everything ready to go for folks. So general housekeeping for anybody who might be joining or tuning in right now. We're going to get started in a minute. And if you do have any questions, Anna has posted this in the note in our chat. But if you have any questions throughout the presentation today, go ahead and put them in the chat and I will answer questions at the end. So keep everything organized and on track, and we'll go ahead and do questions at the end. But please do enter them as we go. And we'll be getting started in here in a minute. Just a couple more minutes for folks here. Okay. All right. Hopefully that's enough time for everybody to join, everybody to tune in and get ready. So today we have a jam-packed agenda. I'm really excited to have this session for everyone today. Like I said in the beginning, just a quick intro. I am Kayla Underkoffler, lead security engineer in the CTO office with Zenity. And I am really excited to be going through this presentation with everyone. We're going to dive in and walk through the experience of building an AI agent in Copilot Studio. Main takeaways here, I want everyone just to understand how easy this is and how anybody can build an AI agent in minutes. Then we're going to talk about some of the risks that are introduced by these AI agents in our environment, and then what we should do about those. So just a little bit about Zenity. What we do is secure AI agents everywhere. That's agents that you're building in SaaS platforms, like within your Microsoft environment, or you're building them in the cloud, or you're building them on endpoints. Our goal is to help you have visibility into all of that, be able to understand who is building what and where, and especially how, and then also provide the insights into what AI agents are doing in the runtime in their daily operations. That's where you want to be monitoring for real threats, and you want to detect and respond to those as they are happening, and that's what we help our customers do. So with that intro, I'm going to go ahead and jump into our demo, and let's build an AI agent. So let me share my screen. And what we are looking at right now is Copilot Studio. So let's get started here. We are building our agent from the ground up. There are a lot of ways you can build an agent. There's templates. There's other places you could just have an M365 agent. So we're going to build the whole story in Copilot Studio, really using those low-code, no-code foundations like drag and drop and help me find the connectors that I need to find. So it's very much an assisted process. This is something anybody who has access to Copilot Studio can do. It's so intuitive. So let's walk through this. So we're going to go in, get started with our new agent. You can see here, like we're already getting assistance from Microsoft in building this agent, letting the platform help you build an agent. We're going to go ahead and configure this on our own. Kayla's document assistant. And then we're going to enter in a description. And so this description is like what your internal teams would read. This is like the human readable form. Maybe you have a schema approved internally that kind of indicates what team does this agent belong to? What is its general purpose? And this is just to help, users and systems understand what this agent is supposed to do. Then we move to the instructions. This part is for the agent. This is where you're telling the agent how it needs to behave and what it's supposed to do in order to help achieve the mission, achieve the goal. So we'll plug my name in here, or we could just say assist as the assistant to the user. Keep it generic. It doesn't have to be someone's name. So the thing about these instructions is they can be as complex as you want to make them or as simple as you want to make them. Maybe as you're going along creating this agent, you realize that there's just something not quite functioning proper, and you've tried all the connections, you've tried some of the different settings. So you just go back to the instructions and really enter that in there. This is for the agent. So we've entered the instructions, the description, the unique name. We could do knowledge, we could do all of this other stuff, but we're going to go ahead and skip right to create, because what I want to emphasize here is how quickly we've gone through this process of entering in this basic information. And right now here, we have gone from nothing to agent. We now have an AI agent in the environment. It's not published yet. We're still building it, but it is an asset in your environment right now. We've gone from here to there. So I could ask a question just to see what we get back. This shows you that this is already functioning. Now, the date's not right, and we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about some of the settings and the risks that are introduced with basic AI, but this shows you that this is already on and functioning. So let's go through some of the settings real quick before we get into stuff. So first off, in order to have an AI agent needs to, first off, of course, have all of the LLM capabilities, the Gen AI capabilities in the background. That's the AI aspect of this, right? But then you get into what makes an agent an agent. In order for an agent to truly meet this definition, it needs to have knowledge, it needs to have access to tools, and it needs to have the reasoning and planning capability to autonomously make decisions and plan out what tools it's going to use at what point and how in order to achieve the goals. So it's its own little capsule of all of these components that make this thing an agent. So what I just created, what we're looking at here, is a shell of an agent, because we don't have all of those other components in yet. Although it is most certainly AI, and it has generative AI capabilities right now. So let's add some knowledge in here. So we're going to go ahead and go to browse. And we're going to jump into our build your own agent content. And we're going to add a text file. So there's a lot of different sources of knowledge that you can add here. This is something we're going to talk about later. For this purpose of this demo, I'm just adding a text file. This is a static resource. The agent will not update this resource. It will not know if this resource has been updated in a different version. This is the knowledge this agent is going to depend on. So it's very important that you understand that from a data management perspective. So we're going to go ahead and add this knowledge resource and let this load here. One of my favorite things about this is that it can take longer for the knowledge to add sometimes than just creating your agent from nothing to agent. So while our knowledge is loading, let's look at some of the settings that we need to be aware of. So first things first, this first setting here, use generative AI orchestration for your agent's responses. This default is set to yes. This is why, although the date was not correct, in my question, this is why the agent could even engage with that question, because Generative AI capabilities are on by default. That's something to be aware of. If you were to use classic orchestration, you could relate that more to like a grounded LLM, a grounded model, like you're specifically telling the agent what it can and cannot use, how it can behave, the questions you're engaging with it. So the default is on. Generative AI capabilities are on. That is something to note while you're building agents. There's a lot of other settings in here. Also, one of them to take note is while generative AI is on, that means it's using the Microsoft foundational knowledge. Web browsing is off by default. So that is a plus, right, to have that. So next we move to some security details. This is a very important one. What we see here is the authentication choices. Really just what I want everybody to do is just have this snapshot in your mind of how easy it is to go from authenticate with Microsoft, the default, the proper choice, to no authentication. It's a radio dial. That's all I have to do is navigate from one to the other. You get a little warning, you get a little, like, oh, I don't know that you want to do this. But this is how easy it is for people to make the choice to change the authentication, to make this a publicly available agent. So that's the big thing here. Anyone can interact with this agent if you have the no authentication setting. So we're going to leave this the default. That is the recommended choice for this setting. And we're not going to go through any of these, but you can see as you're going through the amount of options you would have to customize the configuration. So while our knowledge is still working here, we have the generative capabilities, the generative AI capabilities. We have our knowledge resource loading now. Now let's go to tools. The tools that allow an agent to connect into the environment and actually invoke capabilities. So let's see if I can get this thing to build a tool with me. Which I'm not seeing the tools setting pop up. So let's see if we can go a different route. Oh, there we go. Here we go. Now we can create our first tool. So let's add a tool. By the way, if that had not done that, I was going to go to the overview section and I was just going to add a tool from there. There are many ways to get to the outcome while you're building in Copilot Studio or really anywhere else. All right, so this is our tools. Let's go with Excel Online Business. And let's go with, we are going to get tables. Actually, let's double check which one we want because there are so many settings. And this is another thing to keep in mind as we are building out these agents is just the unlimited options of tools and connectors that you have in order to build your agent. And it's very important that we keep track of that because if your attack surface of your agent increases to the point where you don't know how many tools it has the ability to connect to, that becomes a problem because your attack surface is now expansive and maybe not exactly what you were expecting that to be. So we are going to stick with the connectors. Yep, let's go for it. Let's stick with that. We're going to list rows present in a table and we're going to add and configure. The other cool thing to call out here is the improvements that are made here are just so continuous and they move very fast. Not a month ago, it took a lot more work to configure this tool than what I'm going to show you today. So first things first, unique name, unique description, right? It's very similar to setting the agent up. Now here, these first couple additional details are very important. This is where you're going to have your first opportunity to insert a human in the loop or not. So if you did not want this agent to act autonomously when to use the tool, you would not want this checked. You would want to uncheck that, right? One of the other settings here is authentication. So this is what's telling the agent which authentication to use. Are you going to default to the user's authentication, which means anybody who's interacting with the tool, or are you going to be hard-coded to use the authentication of the person who created this agent in the first place. The default, the recommended practice is use the end user's credentials. But you can see how easy this is to make a choice to use the author's credentials, and it does happen in practice. So let's get into building our agent. So we're going to look through here. The drop downs work perfectly well. We're going to go to OneDrive. We're going to go to custom values. And custom values. You can see how this is so simple and intuitive. Team conferences. This is just an asset that I've given. You can see here how it is giving you the unique identifier without you having to search for it. That was one of the things not a month ago. You had to find this unique identifier yourself. In this situation now, with the improvements they've made, the drop downs are just that easy. And the table. So we have the inputs completely configured now. So let's go ahead and save this. And our tool is saved. Let's check back with our knowledge. That's still thinking. So let's see if we'll be able to interact with our tool while this is still going. So sometimes you need to ask a little bit specifically. We're going to give this some direction in the team engagements. In the team engagements workbook. How many engagements does the team have? What I'm doing here is just testing that this works. Now, this is an important part too here. I have to give pass my credentials across, approve of the connection for Excel Business. This is one of those things where we are implicitly trusting that this is accurate. We are implicitly trusting that we are allowed to do this, and that this is something that I'm allowed to do. I think as humans at this point in time, we all know that if you say no, it's just not going to work. So you will allow this. But there we go. They have a total of 9 speaking engagements in the workbook. So what we've done here is we have created a fully functioning agent from nothing to knowledge resources to tools that are interacting with a live worksheet, a live data set that I have given this agent access to. And that completes the whole circle. Now, the only things you could be changing and adding, you can see here, we could now introduce multi-agents. This is where we would chain agents together in order to maybe complete a more complex use case. Or we could add in triggers. If you create and enable a trigger, you are now truly making this agent autonomous. It means that based on the activity that you've set up in the trigger, the agent will take action on its own to complete that. So if you do set up a trigger, this is now truly an autonomous agent. It has all the other components and it will act on its own when the event happens. So we just did this. We had just accomplished our mission. We created an agent. So I'm going to go ahead now and switch gears in our activity here because, we accomplished the mission. We created an agent. We increased the attack surface of our organization. So what could possibly go wrong with that, right? What could go wrong with anybody being able to build an AI agent in your environment with that ease of steps and processes? So we accomplished the mission. We created an agent that is there to help Kayla get my job done better, faster, easier. Now, instead of me having to search through probably the ridiculous amount of Excel spreadsheets, Microsoft documents, all of these knowledge sources, instead of me having to manually search for all of them, I say, hey, how many speaking engagements does my team have this month? Who is speaking at this one conference? What's the topic? I can ask my agent that. I don't have to go back and say, oh, what was the name of that file, right? This is supposed to make me more efficient. So in that quest for efficiency, I have introduced risks into the environment. So let's dig into those risks. So at Zenity, we like to bucket risks into a myriad of ways. In this specific situation, talking through the agent we just built, we're going to separate them into build time and runtime risks. So build time risks are the foundation of the choices that you've made as you built this agent. When I left the default for authentication, when I showed the user authentication, when I was creating the tool, those are all choices that I, the maker, made while creating this agent. Some of the top risks that we see introduced through build time choices are things like authorization misuse and data and secrets handling. And these risks, we will show some in depth, but the main thing I want us to take away from this is that the choices that you make in build time, who is building what, importantly though, how, will increase or decrease the attack surface in runtime. So while there are runtime risks, as you can see through this breakdown I have here, just some of the examples, there are runtime risks that unfortunately we will not be able to completely eliminate due to the nature of our artificial intelligence. There are some of those risks. However, the attack surface, the possible impact of a successful attack through a prompt injection or something, all of those components are either made worse or more secure based off of the build time choices. And that's one of the things that I always want to emphasize is that it is a joint choice that we're making for how we're going to build, how secure it is in runtime, what's the blast radius of something happening to an agent in runtime. So let's get into some examples, add some context. And along these, it's very helpful to think back to the example, the agent that we just created, and how these will actually turn out in an agent running around in the environment. So build time risks first, the choices that we're making as we're creating this agent. So remember that one setting that I said is important and it's a radio dial? Yeah, that's all about authentication, right? So if you make the choice to have an unauthenticated agent running around in the environment, it means that anybody who has the link to that agent can interact with it. That is external, internal, all the above. We would call that an authentication failure. So what you're looking at here is an example of an agent, a copilot, hanging out in the environment. We see all of this critical data and users and infrastructure. You see the whole story of what this agent is connected to. Some probably important business critical data on the back end of this. And you see the main problem here. This is publicly accessible. Anybody who has the link to this agent can interact with it and therefore interact with all of the data and infrastructure and tools that that agent is connected to. We see this happen. This is a common misconfiguration, or sometimes it's a choice made to have a public agent, but it's important that you understand all of the things that agent is connected to if it is public. So what about sharing? So I talked about the choice we were making when we made the tool. Do we use the user authentication, or are we going to use the tool creator's authentication? So what happens here is if you make the choice to use the author's authentication, the person who created the tool, then anybody who uses that agent will be using the author's authentication. That means that we very potentially have a principle of least privilege issue here, because if I have increased permissions in the environment with the tool I'm working with, anybody who's using my agent has my permissions, has inherited my permissions, and that might not be what we want. Additionally, it makes for an investigative nightmare because you have Kayla's assistant running out there doing work on my behalf. So first off, it's not even me necessarily taking the actions. It's my agent using my authentication, my credentials, which is fine and dandy if I'm the only user of this agent. But then you add into account now, if I share that agent beyond just me, now anybody who uses my agent looks like Kayla walking around or doing activities in the environment. And the ability to trace that back is very challenging. So that's just why the default is set to user authentication, but it is so easy to change that when you're working through building an agent. We call this authorization misuse. It's something that we see all the time as well. Next is all about sharing. Kind of again back to this principle of least privilege. Does somebody need to have access to this agent? Is the data that's connected to this agent sensitive? Well, maybe we should be aware of how many users are engaging with that agent, have access to that agent, have elevated permissions to that agent. That is one of the things we need to be aware of when we're building and providing access to these, is that we control that overuse, oversharing risk. Additionally, we talk about sensitive data. So along the lines of oversharing, if there's sensitive data attached to that agent, we need to be aware of that. So in our recalling back to the agent that we just built, I inserted a TXT, right? A static text file as the knowledge resource for my agent. And it talked about my team policy, right? If that policy gets updated outside of that static text file, it is on me, the creator, the organizer, the manager of that agent, to update that knowledge. That means you need to have a robust plan in place for how you are tracking what knowledge has been given to the agent, has been provided to the agent. There's a lot of strategy that comes into play here at the organizational level for how you're going to allow that to happen. On the flip side of that, we configured a tool, right? An action. We gave the agent access to a live data source. So there was a static data source on one side, but then we gave it access to a tool that was connected to a live data source. In this situation now, if someone doesn't realize that my agent has access to this speaking engagements Excel spreadsheet, and they enter in sensitive data to that spreadsheet, not knowing that there's a trickle-down effect, that could introduce the possibility of sensitive data being exposed. So on the flip side, it's very important not only that you understand that the agent has data, you need to understand that the data is being accessed by the agent. So both sides of this have to be accounted for and tracked and monitored. So those are just some of the examples of runtime risks. So of the build time risks. So now how do these play out in runtime risks, and or what are the unique runtime risks we need to be aware of? So first off, curious AI. So we went through and we looked at this option of generative AI, and you can see this screenshot looks a little bit different from the one we walked through with our agent. And that's because of the changes made where generative AI is now the default. So it's very important that we track this, because what curious AI is the ability for AI to hallucinate, right? So it is not October 25th, 2023. And that's the result that we got. That is the most basic example I could ever give for hallucination. It is important that we are aware when we give our agents the capability to be fully immersed in the generative AI capabilities, that hallucinations will happen. And you have trickle-down effects of hallucinations and bad data being used as an input for the output of a tool action. So we have to be aware of curious AI as a runtime risk. Additionally, we get into the world of prompt injection. This is the big one, right? So for prompt injection, we're talking about direct and indirect prompt injection. Prompt injection is an inherent risk in AI in general. It is because of how AI is built using natural human language. It's the inability for the system to determine the difference between the instructions given at creation, the system instructions, and instructions that are provided by someone else, whether in a nefarious way or in some other situation. It's the inability for the system to understand the difference. So you can have indirect prompt injection, where that is the agent going out and consuming an external resource that has a prompt injection embedded in that external resource. So indirectly, someone is able to compromise your agent, or a direct engagement. So let's say your agent is publicly available. You can directly engage and try and get the prompts you can explore in the system and try and understand what tools does it have access to? What can I possibly get into with this agent? And then use direct prompt injection to try and exploit that and compromise the agent. The results of prompt injection allow us to do so many things. So many things. In the end, it's compromise, right? It's a compromise of an asset. So it's data exfiltration, it's phishing, it's misinformation. All of those things are the result of prompt injection in the environment. And again, this is something that we cannot eliminate. We cannot eliminate this risk. So what do we do? What do we do about all of these risks? We've talked about build time risk. Those are choices that we've made. There's some controls we can have there. There's curious AI. Maybe a fewer controls in there. Maybe that's something we need to be monitoring for. And prompt injection is the same story. There are controls in place. There are ways that we can work around this, but we will not completely eliminate it. So what do we do to secure these AI agents? So we're going to just go through a very high-level overview of the AI TRISM. This is Gartner's framework for how you implement trust, risk, and security management for your AI systems. So there's a lot of information that I have here on this slide. I'm just going to talk through the triangle. So starting from the bottom up, when we're talking about the way that AI agents are built and used in the environment, we have your traditional layers of security at the bottom. This is the infrastructure and the base layers that are the same as they have been in past. It's not necessarily changing when you're talking about how people are building AI agents. The infrastructure security is the same as it has been, and you have the same protections in place, the established tool sets that we have today. We get into information governance. That's a lot of the same story as well. A data protection plan, program, strategy is critical. Making sure that you know where your data is, where your sensitive data is it labeled properly? All of that has not changed from the past. If anything, this information governance layer and the infrastructure and stack, the foundations of security that are embedded within those layers have now become that much more important because of the scale that is now introduced with AI. It's more important that we enforce those foundations because of the capabilities and the scale of AI. So then when we talk about the top two sections of this pyramid, that's where we're getting into unique AI agents, specifically risks. So we talk about the AI runtime and inspection and enforcement, as well as AI governance. So if we start top down here, when we talk about AI governance, this is the visibility, right? Who is building what and where and how. That's security posture management. That's understanding that we have the guardrails in place that allow people to make secure choices when building agents, that we have the default set properly, that we have our data policies enforced in the build time choices that impact the security posture. Then we have the runtime inspection and enforcement. This is getting into those runtime risks I covered, right? Prompt injection, curious AI. We cannot eliminate those risks. Therefore, we must build in defense in depth, monitoring, continuous monitoring, discovery, response. All of that has to take place in order to understand what are the inputs for AI and what are the outputs? Yes, of course. But there's so much more that goes on behind the scenes. We configured that tool. What are the actions of that tool, the steps that the agent is taking in order to get from the input from the user to the output? There's a whole story back there. And if you're not watching that, you're not having a continuous monitoring capability that's there to alert you when something goes awry, you're blind to that whole component of how an agent works in the environment. And the key to call out, which the AI TRISM does emphasize, is that the traditional security tools that we have for infrastructure and stack, for data governance, they do not cover the specific AI governance and especially the runtime enforcement and inspection components. So this is where we have to broaden what we're looking at and the tools we're using and the processes that we are embedding in the whole circle in order to make sure that we have these security layers and defense in depth in place for our AI agent deployments. So this is one of the approaches that we recommend organizations look at. That TRISM, this framework is one of the best. It's leading. It gives teams real structure and how to process your framework, your security framework for AI. So we do like to recommend this for organizations and walk through how you are actually making sure every step in the way is taken care of. There are other frameworks out there, of course, NIST, the AI risk management framework, we have ISO, we have other standards that are helping organizations, but we really like to emphasize the AI TRISM features. So we talked about the risks that are introduced in the environment, both the build time risks, the choices that you're making when you're building agents, the runtime risks that are inherent in AI and for the most part cannot be eliminated, can only be managed, be controlled, have defense in depth built in to understand them. And then we've talked about how you do that. What do those layers look like for addressing these risks in the environment? And I think the cool part about all of this is that we now have this example in our mind of how easy it is to build an agent. We walked through all the steps. You saw how easy it is to select one radio dial over another, which impacts these follow-on components of build time risk and runtime risk. So hopefully that was a good overview of how we tackle AI agent security, and it gives you a little character to walk along with, which is the AI assistant that we built along the way. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing now and take a look and see if we have any questions. And yes, I see Anna has linked in the AI TRISM white paper that we have, and TRISM resources are out there for sure. So make sure you're looking into that. And we'll have more resources that we will share out after the fact as well. So one last minute for any questions, but if not, I think we'll be able to wrap up. Thank you so much for tuning in today, for going on this journey of creating an agent and understanding what those risks are and then how we handle them. And hopefully now you can take this back into your organization and work through how you are going to implement all of these security features and capabilities in order to make sure you can empower innovation in your organization by having AI agents be that force multiplier, but you do that in a secure way. So thank you everyone for joining today. And I think that we are good to go. I don't see any questions. So thank you everyone, and happy securing of your AI agents.